And our top focus in WION at this hour. After months of demonstrations, reports now suggest that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is all set to withdraw his controversial judicial overhaul bill. As per reports, the Prime Minister has been under pressure from all quarters, especially after his extreme step of sacking his own defense minister. On Sunday, Israel Defense Minister had given a statement calling for a halt to the process of passing the judicial overhaul plan. Under pressure from widespread demonstrations, cracks had started emerging within the ruling coalition since Friday. Israel's economy minister and its culture and sports minister had called the current situation untenable and have also said that if Netanyahu decides to stop the legislation, then he should be backed. Now, at present, the Netanyahu-led government only enjoys a slender majority with 64 seats in the 120-member Knesset. Earlier in the day, Israel's President Isaac Herzog urged the government to call a halt to the planned legislation as well. Now, these legislations has ignited some of the biggest nationwide demonstrations in Israel's history. The judicial overhaul, which would give the executive control over appointing judges to the Supreme Court, allow the government to override court rulings on the basis of simple parliamentary majority. And it has drawn mass protests for weeks now. For more on this, we're now being joined by correspondent Jody Cohen from Ranana. Hi, Jody. Now, protests have been going on throughout the night following the sacking of the defense minister. Take us through the latest details from the ground.
Hi, so I'm outside Danny Danon MP's house. Now, this is a strategic location for a protest because the coalition, as we know, in the last election won 64 seats. They need 61 votes to pass legislation. And in the latest, we're hearing that as well as Yoav Gallant, the defense minister who has now been fired from that position, as well as him expressing concerns about the judicial reform process and wanting to pause, Yuli Edelstein has also reportedly expressed concern. And also Nir Barkat, the trade minister, is thought potentially, the three of them are thought potentially likely to vote against the judicial selection bill if it goes forward to the plenum now. Now, Danny Danon is another influential member of parliament from Netanyahu's own Likud party, and he's thought also potentially to be in favour, certainly, of judicial reform, but also potentially in favour of slowing down the process to allow for more consensus. So this is strategic here, because if they can convince one more or two more MPs possibly not to vote with the coalition, we could see things not happening if it progresses. We were told that Prime Minister Netanyahu was going to be making an announcement earlier today. That has now been delayed. So there's pressure from within Likud. Netanyahu himself is thought to want to see a freeze of the judicial overhaul. President Herzog has called to stop the legislation, but there are others within the coalition, most notably National Security Minister Ben Gvir, who is calling for the legislation to continue. So Netanyahu is at this crossroads, if you like, between pausing the legislation and potentially, if he does so, perhaps some members of the coalition might resign. But it's too early to say that as yet. We're waiting for Netanyahu's announcement.
But absolutely, Jody. Just earlier in the day as well, Israeli President Isaac Herzog also said that the judicial overhaul bill should be taken back. So my question to you is that, is Netanyahu expected to halt the judicial reforms in light of these massive demonstrations that have taken place and the calls from ministers and the president to do so?
So that is what people have been expecting, but there has been this delay in his expected announcement. We know that all of the judicial reform bills in the original package were delayed. The coalition has already said that those will be delayed for a month, and that was in response to the protest. They also amended the one remaining bill, which is the judicial selection bill, and their proposal is that the coalition effectively would have control over the first two judges' appointments, and then after that, the next two appointments would have to be more consensus candidates. That's been rejected by the opposition. But it has now, we're hearing it has now passed the Constitution Committee, and it remains to be seen if it's going to go forward now to the plenum or whether or not Netanyahu might pause the legislation in this process. But we'll know more over the next few hours.
Thank you, Jody, for getting us up to speed on that. We'll, of course, be tracking this very closely on WION. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
For more on this, we're also being joined by Professor Amtzia Baram, who is a professor at the Department of the History of West Asia at the University of Haifa in Israel. Welcome to the broadcast, sir.
Good morning.
Morning. My question to you is that, is Netanyahu all set to withdraw his controversial judicial overhaul bill? And if yes, then why now?
Well, if Netanyahu is still thinking rationally, and there is an if here, he will announce that the legislation process is being halted, postponed, maybe for a few weeks, in order to enable the opposition to engage in negotiations with the coalition and reach a widely accepted reform which many believe is necessary. Not the way it's being done now, and not to the extent it's being done now. The problem that he has is, if he decides to continue the thrust towards completing the enactment plan, three of his coalition parliament members will vote against it. But even if that happens, he still has 61 against 59. So he can still pass. He can still pass the coalition, the legislation as he wants. Still, that's the case. The point is that two of his coalition members are sort of very hesitant what to do. So if those two against, then in fact, he will no longer be prime minister. So he has to find out what's happening there. Furthermore, if he, with Knesset, parliamentary majority, a very slight majority, 61, against 59. If he still decides to pass the next law today, sometime later today, the Israeli economy and society, not the Israeli voters, they are 50-50 more or less, but the Israeli economy and society will use not a nuclear bomb. It's not going to be a Hiroshima type. It's going to be a doomsday hydrogen bomb. Already the international airport is closed down.
Right.
And strikes are everywhere. University are on strikes, schools are on strikes, industry is on strike.
Right. Just to interrupt there, sir. Now, like you mentioned, that there seems to be cracks appearing within Netanyahu's coalition, especially in light of the sacking of the defense minister by Netanyahu. I want to seek your perspective that are there cracks starting to show in the ruling coalition? Because we've seen how Israel's economy minister and also the sports and culture minister, they've clearly said that Netanyahu should withdraw the judicial reform bill, and if that happens, they will be supporting him.
No, they will not. In the Knesset vote, in the parliamentary vote, they'll vote against him. Three of them, three cabinet ministers. Yes. He has another problem. If he insists on replacing the cabinet, the minister for defense, Gallant, who spoke against the plan yesterday, if that's what he does, he'll have a huge problem, maybe insoluble problem, with the military, with the Israeli Defense Force, the chief of staff, and the head of the Mossad, and the head of the Israeli FBI, Shin Bet, all asked the Minister of Defense to speak against continuing the legislation. They asked him, they met with him, and looking at their own establishment below them, they are very worried. So they asked him to speak up. He spoke up as they asked him to do. And if Bibi insists on sacking him, he announced it, but he hasn't yet sent him a letter, a signed letter. If he insists on sacking him, all three, and that's the Israeli security establishment, will be in deep, deep trouble, because to accept any replacement, Bibi Leki, will be so humiliating for them and for their organizations. God forbid.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us and WION and sharing your insights with us. Thanks very much.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.